is I try to share with them that there has to be several identifiers. It can't just be just a handshake. It needs to also be, who's this kid hanging out with? What colors are these kids wearing as a group? There have to be other identifiers. Just like you can't tell if a kid is learning disabled by looking at him, then you cannot tell if a kid is in a gang by just looking. So for learning disabilities, we have to do what? We have to test and make sure that kid is actually learning disabled. If the kid can't read, we don't know. Maybe nobody taught him. That does not necessarily mean he's learning disabled. If he can't write, that does not denote that. But it may be an indicator. So now we have two. He can't read, he can't write. That's an indication that he may be learning disabled. And now we ask him to constantly sit down because he's bouncing off the walls. Maybe he has ADHD. Okay? As a result, that's another identifier. But until we actually test that kid, we still don't know if he's learning disabled. Well, the same exists with the gangs and with membership. If that kid does a certain hand signal constantly, then it might be a problem. One of the things you got to be aware of, the gangs have a hierarchy. So there's leadership. And when just like in the armed services, if a private comes across a captain, he must salute him. Well, the reason why we're concerned with handshakes in gangs is that those handshakes identify that whenever that warrior or soldier comes across that captain or lieutenant or higher up, he must do some kind of gang signal to acknowledge that higher ranking official. And so this is why we're concerned with that. That too is an identifier. Along with his dress code, along with some of his mannerisms. How is he doing in school? Is he maintaining an A average like he was a year ago? Is he attending school on a regular basis, or is he cutting school? Is he missing classes on a continuum? Those are other identifiers that we must take into consideration. And more importantly, if this kid's got exuberant amount of money that you did not give him and he cannot be accounted for, then we know that is a strong identifier that this kid is involved in some kind of illegal behavior. And remember what my definition of gangs are. The bottom line is the gang must be involved in criminal activity. And so you'll see that he'll have exuberant amount of money that cannot be accounted for. When you ask him, where'd you get this? He can't account for it. That's a problem. When you talk about gangs and identifiers, you have to talk about the gang beads. You have to talk about the wearing of certain colors. You have to talk about the differences between flagging and also them wearing flags for their country, or flagging, meaning that they're actually demonstrating of using their colors as flags. That's a concern that parents should be aware of, but most importantly, that the parent understand that there should be a no tolerance in the household for things that are not supported by the household. Just like in schools, there should be a no tolerance. If you're wearing those beads for religious reasons, you don't need to wear them in school, and they certainly should not be shown. So for the purposes of gangship, they always take the beads out and they're wearing them. Well, in school, you don't have to do that if you're wearing it for religious reasons. So even the way those beads are being worn, you have to be really careful and watch out for. The other thing is that there are other identifiers. Like I said, the handkerchiefs, the scarves, the tattoos is something that we need to talk about because tattoos also do it. And even talking about the tattoos, they also tattoo certain symbols. And so when we talk about the differences between like wearing a Puerto Rican flag or the difference in wearing a Confederate flag, and that how one really looks at the country and the other one really looks at a culture. And that culture can be, although it may support the white race, the African American race may have a problem with it. And so these are areas that we must be concerned with. And that's why I think it's so important for us to have a no tolerance to wearing certain flags, colors, and beads, and or tattoos in a school system, and definitely in around the home and the community. If we're supposed to be a community where we're galvanizing people, then why are we choosing symbols that actually turn some community members away? And so anything that's offensive to one is offensive to all, and we should not have any part or any dealings with that. Listen, love uniforms. I think uniforms and kids should go together like hands and gloves. I think that the uniform does a bunch of things. Not only even removing the gang issue out the way for a moment, kids who have uniforms cannot focus in on the designers. And I think one of the major problems with even getting into the, when we talk about bullying, it starts with ranking on kids, and kids, oh, you got on cheap sneakers, or oh, you have on cheap jeans. Those are not the designer jeans that I'm wearing. That kind of designer feuds get into bullying and then get into the gangship problems. So if we can head off some of the problems at the past, you get into uniform wearing, you actually circumvent that issue of bullying and wearing the wrong clothing, which doesn't make sense anyway. My jeans wear the same way as your jeans. They protect me. It doesn't matter whose name is on the back of them. You know, so yes, I think uniform and schools should go hand in glove. And it doesn't have to be an awkward uniform. It could be a certain color shirt with a certain color pair of pants. And I think that it's easy enough, because one of the issues of argument for parents is that they can't afford the uniforms. But if you just go with a certain color shirt and a certain color pants, that makes it good. Now here's the problem. You got to watch the colors too, because your coloring choice could also make the gang feel really good about your color choice. So you just have to be real careful in choosing the right colors. But yes, it's definitely a concern. All right. You also got to watch the caps, the baseball hats. You also have to watch the sports clothing, because the sports clothing get into a lot of the gangs. Don't get me wrong, but the gangs use the sports clothing to actually enhance their meaning of what it means. So I don't want to use an example here, because I don't want to actually denote any other sports team or make them feel bad about it. But the bottom line is that you have to be real careful with the sports clothing as well and what they're wearing, because it can also symbolize the gang. Yes, if your kid is wearing a certain team hat and doesn't know what that team stands for, or if let's say it's a baseball hat, and he can't tell you who the pitcher of that team is, or who's the captain of that team, or what's going on with the baseball averages of that team, then 9 times out of 10, that kid really shouldn't be wearing that hat, because that's a problem. You know, and that shows that kid is really just wearing that to symbolize some other things. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably gang membership. See, one of the things that we got to realize that our kids are not dumb. They're very smart. And most kids do what they see, not what you say. So when you tell them don't use drugs, remember that model? I think one of the president's wives came up with that, and she said, just say no. Well, that didn't do anything during that era. If you remember, there were more drug users at that time than any time. So we have to model for our kids. And one of the things that they've taken upon is some of the secret societies, like the Masons, for instance, who use secret hand signs and secret gestures about certain things. And those kids are very smart, so what they did was they took the hand gestures and the signs and they used them. So they can talk across a crowded room to each other without us even knowing it. And there are certain things that they'll do with clothing. And that's why it's important for them, for us as in the schools and in our homes, to not allow them to wear the color flags, because they call that flagging. And these kids will wear the flag in certain ways that it'll demonstrate to other people that their gang is on board. It'll also really direct them to know that this particular kid, it may be holding the drugs, or maybe holding the weapons, or maybe is the kid to go to for the warlord. There are different flagging symbols that they can use. And so that's why it's so important for them not to be allowed to wear those colors and not to be allowed to flag. And that's why I recommend, when you talk about uniforms in schools, I strongly recommend them, because a flag is not a part of the uniform. So we can clearly cancel that out.